Good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us for your Friends of Europe's discussion on a European Climate Situation Room. Before I say any words about that and what the purpose of this conversation is and the fine line of speakers and contributors we have, just some rules of the game of engagement. Those of you who are Zoom savvy know most of this, but make sure your screen is on, you have your name listed, and also stay muted. When you wish to make a comment, raise a question, etc., a query, please use your virtual hand. For those of you who don't know where it is, you look at the participants icon, press that and you'll find it and you can raise it. And that will make sure that I get the opportunity of understanding that you want to come in, and I'll try and take as many of you into this conversation as possible. I also want to welcome our live stream audience. You're not forgotten, you're included, a very warm welcome to you. Those of you who wish to raise a question, etc., please use hashtag FOE debate to post your question, and we'll also aim to take as many of you as possible into this conversation about European Climate Situation Room. I also want to encourage you to use a Zoom chat. An hour flies by really very quickly. Is always surprising me, and I'm terrible at timekeeping in terms of making sure that we can finish on time, especially because our debates are so rich and fulsome. But to make sure we capture your thoughts, questions, queries, or questions to the panel that I may not be able to take, put them down on the Zoom chat. We capture that. It's a really good, helpful way of understanding what people are thinking and saying, and we capture that and we're able to then reflect that in the report coming out from this discussion. So there we go. We have a number of perspectives on this conversation around a European Climate Situation Room. We have public sector, private sector, intergovernmental organisations, etc., and the European Space Agency. This conversation sits part of our brand new programme we launched earlier this year on Making Space Matter. It's a partnership with the European Space Agency, and this particular conversation we wanted to have fairly early on, not least because of the climate emergency. You feel so tired even talking about the emergency because we keep on saying the same things around the urgency, the emergency, the facts and figures. It's the hottest decade in history. We've had the hottest year so far. We know that we've lost the equivalent of Libya in terms of hectares of forest land. We know that actually this year and the past year, especially in the context of COVID and the economic crisis, governments have ratcheted up their targets. First time we've seen more ambitious targets, but for many in the fields of expertise in this area would suggest they're not good enough. They're not fast enough. They need to be better. But we also know that the European Parliament has pulled together a package with the Commission on putting everything to do with space data and space capacities under one umbrella. Also, we know that renewable energy was the only energy source that was in the highest demand out of others, despite the COVID context we find ourselves in. We also know, and I'll end on this note, that we don't really capture effectively the relationship, and this is really the heart of this debate, the relationship between data, which is real time, that provides you with almost down to the street level analysis of air quality, pollution, etc., and so forth, rising sea levels, crop developments, etc., and so forth. But how often is it used by decision makers? And I suppose what we want to do today is have a conversation that, is it time that decision makers, political leaders, and others came together with a different mindset, and that's why we called it the Climate Situation Room. It borrows from what happened in World Wars I and II. It's about that capacity to come together and really work in a way that reflects the urgency and the emergency we face, but to use data and intelligence in a way that tracks changes and pushes behavior in a different direction, and also a different mindset and perhaps a different culture of operation. So what should that look like? What are the political drivers for it? What are the economic drivers for it? And is the notion of a European Climate Situation Room the thing that we should be focusing on in terms of actually shifting a gear on where we find ourselves right now, so we don't, in another year, spend time saying, here we've had COP again in Glasgow and the same outcome, i.e. more chat, more numbers, more paperwork, but actually very little action. So on that note, I want to invite our very first speaker, Koko Warner, who is one of the lead authors of the IPCC reports on land and other matters. Koko, are you there?
I am here, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for the invitation. Really excited to be here with all of you.
Koko, the only thing is we can't see you. Now, that might be deliberate.
And there you go.
There
Just
we
happened
go.
to open that shutter. Hi, everyone.
Koko,
Sorry.
thank you for joining us again. You've been on, Friends of Europe's discussions around climate change and climate matters over the past couple of years, and it's really good to have you back. What I'd like you to do for us is set the scene, if you like. I've just said to you what we're trying to do here. You know better than anybody else that the agreements that we have, whilst they're historic globally, are elective. There are no compliance mechanisms, there are no regulatory mechanisms to understand actually if governments are doing what they're doing, and actually whether governments have really got the bit between their teeth to act and behave differently and make different kind of decisions. So tell us, where do we find ourselves currently in this situation in the context of a discussion that we're having about a European climate situation room? Koko, over to you.
Yeah, super. Thanks. Maybe I can just provide a few framings. I'm also so eager to hear the other panelists. So maybe just to get started, the central idea of what we're doing globally as an international community in climate change is that trust is the basis of cooperation. And this is a tremendous decade ahead of all of us as humanity to build a bright future. And it centers on trust. So a key question that I'm coming and hoping to learn today, and maybe all of you too, is how can Earth observation and other technologies build trust and help us actually see that future that we're going to build together? That's, for me, the main idea and the main question. So as all of you guys know, we're in a time of tremendous change, some challenges. I'm going to name three. The first challenge is, of course, climate change, but pick your challenge, your favorite one. So many of the things that humanity is up against now are problems that we create together. They're manifestations of our collective behaviors, whether it is maybe you really care about plastics in the oceans. That's the way that humans interact with nature. Biodiversity, agriculture, food systems, climate change, it's all kind of coming down to that key question, what we're doing together. And another challenge number two, is that people do what they see other people doing. And many people, my family, for example, often will ask me, well, what's a nice person like you doing working in climate change? Either there's no such thing, scary, or I'm just one person. How can my behavior possibly make any difference? And I think that's a nature of us as social creatures. We do what we see other people doing. And if we don't see other people doing what, maybe should be done, then we feel kind of stuck. So that's another challenge. And maybe the third challenge that I'll mention is a philosophical one. For any of you who follow philosophy, Bertrand Russell, one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, gave a wonderful speech in 1957. The setting was the UK was considering whether they should pursue nuclear armaments. Russell Bertrand, as a pacifist, said, no, we don't want to go in that direction. And he made a point, and this is I think the challenge that we face today as well. He said in ages past, a lot of humanity made decisions because we didn't know. And he said, now we know, we have science just like today, and we're so much farther than we were however many 6 years ago or more, or 70 or 80 years ago. And now it's just a question of whether we'll make the right decision or whether folly will prevail. And I don't think any of us can afford that. That's not the future that we want. So where does UNFCCC fit in? UNFCCC is the UN Framework Climate Change Convention. All of you have heard about the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, I'm going to mention two parts. There's much to talk about, but of course, the Paris Agreement brought all countries of the world together, and all of you, all actors, we call you non-party actors, non-state actors, and we decided we really have to stay to keep global temperature change well below 2 degrees. And so much the better if we can keep us below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial. Today we're at about 1.1, 1.2, so we're getting close. And there are no safety rails for our planet. We already see all of these changes around the world. So as I said, and Dharmendra, you mentioned this, the Paris Agreement is an all hands on deck agreement. All countries agree to voluntarily do what they can to contribute to this great cause to avoid catastrophic climate change. Now, that voluntariness has a transparency framework attached to it. And that's Article 4, if any of you care to look it up. This is called the Enhanced Transparency Framework. And the idea is that countries will voluntarily measure and report and allow independent experts to verify their greenhouse gas emissions. So this is really intriguing. Could technology help us enhance that enhanced transparency framework? This is going to be one of the key issues at our discussions in Glasgow at COP26. I hope all of you will find a way to contribute. They're incredibly important discussions. And that's the plan. So let me mention 3 things and then I'll quickly conclude. We have a moment at COP26 in Glasgow. There are a few things from the Paris Agreement that still need tidying up. We need a market mechanism, or at least that's what parties have said they want. That's Article 6, in case you care. We need to wrap up the Enhanced Transparency Framework. That's Article 4. Countries need to submit those voluntary contributions. Those are called nationally determined contributions. So there is a lot of work to move. And here we are, just a few months out of that. So a lot of stuff to do. The second and third parts of the plans. The second part is your role. There's a great role for experts. Some experts are specifically involved in these panels that help verify countries' reports. Technology will have a role to play increasingly in the future. Right now, I understand from my Earth observation colleagues that satellites can take columns of atmospheric concentrations, but you need that ground-based truthing. So there's a lot more to evolve, and it's amazing and wonderful to see this leadership in Europe. Huge commendations, and we're excited to learn more. The third part for all of us, the third part of the plan, is to foster conversations, to show and visualize what's going on in our world. And satellite technologies, among others, have a huge role to play because people do what they see. If we can raise public awareness, that helps do 2 things. It changes beliefs about how humans are changing the planet and shaping it. It changes our perceptions of the opportunities and risks. And those 2 things precede behavioral change. And ultimately, that's what we need. We need to trust in order to cooperate. And to cooperate, we need to change what we're doing together. Everything is on the line, but we have so much to win. And just to circle back, this is the last thing that I'll say. Bertrand Russell, in that 1957 speech, said, "We are on the brink of an amazing age with untold prosperity and peace to be had." And indeed, for some at least, that was part of the story of the 20th century. And here we are, kind of a fifth of the way into the 21st century. We have new challenges and new opportunities ahead, and we're going to shape it together. Thank you.
Koko, as ever, fabulous. And thank you for invoking Bertrand Russell. I thought that, I suppose it shows someone's age, but not yours. I thought people won't even know who he is. However, I'm really grateful that you brought that into this shape and the focus of this conversation. I wish peer pressure applied to politicians, because actually if you got more politicians behaving in the right way, we might get more of them doing that. But somehow peer pressure seems to be kind of, not applying its pressure on them to act in a certain way, other than to act badly sometimes on this agenda. On enhanced transparency, very briefly, give us a sense of what, an independent verification looks like. So what, you have a group of guys and girls going into a city or a member state and look at data? How is it? It sounds as if you're, is it kind of an approach which is pretty analog, or is it digital? What do you do?
Exactly. And that is exactly the question that will be discussed and agreed upon in Glasgow. There was, under the Kyoto Protocol, a group of countries, primarily industrialized countries, committed to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And now we're in a new era. So we have that previous system of measuring, reporting, and verifying. And what needs to be done now is to figure out how do we do that for all countries, because all countries need now to make their contribution. So that's exactly the question. I'll describe what's happened in the past. In the past, countries have reported, and technical panels have come together, reviewed the report. So we have a ton of atmospheric scientists, for example, who come together and review those reports. And so one of the questions may be, indeed, what role could a kind of independent technology play in this enhanced transparency? So that is the question of the day.
So
we know what it's looked like in the past, but we have a future to forge
what occurs
together.
to me is that it seems a bit kind of a bit late in the day in terms of you guys getting your act together about actually figuring out what you do. And it sounds like those of, this, it reminds me of those of you who'll be old enough, as old as me, is that it's like using a typing pool of secretaries writing stuff rather than actually doing what you have on your smartphone or your iPads, etc. So, okay, I'm not going to push you any further, but it sounds as if like even you folk need to be really thinking differently about digital and its capacity. But I won't challenge you further now, but I'll come back to you. But
please help us. I think that would be helpful.
But it is startling that, the act isn't got together insofar as what independent verification looks like. And it seems, and we'll hear now from Toni, I want to bring Toni in, about how we can go from an analog to a digital approach to this and actually perhaps also reduce public taxpayers' money on gangs of people going into countries to look at this kind of information. Not that I'm being kind of I suppose, right-wing about this, but it is about taxpayers' money at the end of the day. Toni, if I could invite you in, thank you for being with us. Thank you, Koko. Toni, tell us a little bit about, and a warm welcome to you. You are all about Earth observation. Give us a sense of this untapped resource. And when you've listened to what Koko had to say, is it the case that the work that you're doing could really transform the whole agenda around transparency and accountability in terms of member states or countries saying, we're doing this, and at a flick of a button, you could put up a chart and say, actually, liar, you're not telling the truth, it's actually different. Toni, tell us.
Thank you very much, Dharmendra. Obviously, Earth observation from space is essential to understand and react to what we now call the climate crisis, or the climate urgency. We're no longer talking about climate change. I think everybody has understood that things are changing. And we are taking the pulse of the Earth from space. And I will try to give you a short explanation what impact this can have. So the first example, I will go back in history because the ozone hole is a perfect example where Earth observation has led to a clear political action and serve as an inspiration for global efforts to address the climate urgency. The ozone hole has been continuously monitored from space since the 80s. And actually these observations informed the Montreal Protocol to forbid the use of chlorofluorocarbons. This is the stuff we all had in our fridges and in our spray bottles at that time. That became forbidden, and actually, thanks to this space observation-enabled decision that was taken at that time, the ozone hole is now closing; it's recovering. So that's a very good historical example of how Earth observation can enable decisions which lead to a success. So what's happening now? If I can have the next slide. The scientific community has defined a series of essential climate variables which must be monitored in the long term to understand what's going on Earth. Most of these variables can be observed from space, some of them actually only from space. And since 2008, ESA has been running a dedicated program, the Climate Change Initiative, to build these time series together with climate modeling community, and the results are freely available online. With Copernicus, Europe has the best Earth observation system in the world. Mm-hmm. In the visuals, you can see a few examples of the results obtained so far. Some parameters are well known, such as sea level rise and the concentration of greenhouse gases. If I can have the next slide. So when the COVID pandemic hit us in March 2020, we established a common public dashboard with NASA and JAXA. JAXA is the Japanese space agency, to monitor the impact of the crisis. This dashboard will continue post-COVID and provide visibility on the climate crisis to citizens, as Koko explained, the importance of people being aware of what's going on, and also decision makers. Some examples of what we observe, if I can have the next slide. The contribution of ice melting to the sea level rise is well documented, showing the global sea level contribution from the Arctic and the Greenland ice, sheet mass change, and the Antarctic. This is derived by space-based measurements. This is something we do in cooperation with the United States, and this ice sheet mass balance intercomparison exercise study was an input to the 5th assessment report of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The impact of the melting ice at our poles is easily understood. But we also focus on more intricate parameters which control the functioning of the Earth system and the evolution of the climate. Just to mention a few, if I can have the next slide. The ground biomass and its ability to capture carbon, which we aim at mapping from space with dedicated satellites. And the next slide shows the ability of oceans to act as a carbon sink thanks to phytoplankton, small marine organisms at the basis of the ocean food chain, which actually is the ocean's living carbon pump. So what are the next steps? Europe's intention is to extend these space-based observation capabilities in various areas, notably the ability to map greenhouse gas concentrations at an unprecedented accuracy. Such observation will allow to track back concentration of greenhouse gases to the emission sources on the surface of the Earth. Yes, to answer the question that was raised, we will be able to measure who emitted what. We are working hard to have the first satellite of this kind in orbit, the so-called CO2 monitoring mission by 2025 with the Copernicus program. Our satellites actually generate a huge amount of data. We are into the so-called big data, actually very big data. The Destination Earth initiative undertaken by DG Connect involving ESA, ECMWF, and EUMETSAT aims at exploiting all these data using artificial intelligence and high performance computing. We are talking about digital twins of the Earth, which will allow to simulate the Earth system and perform what-if analysis, actually foresight analysis. The CNI is a space observation-enabled tool. It will allow to take informed decisions. So sorry for having been somewhat lengthy, but this is actually the very short answer to your question.
Oh, Toni, thank you very much. And those images are fascinating, and it's like, you know, it's kind of makes us realize that we are living in tomorrow to a certain extent in terms of the capacity of data to show us what's happening. But it feels like it's, as Koko said, how do we kind of transport that or transform it into something about locality so that people really see and believe it? Because that's what it's going to matter. Seeing it on a globe is a different thing, but understanding what's happening in your neighborhood can perhaps change things. I want to take some quick fire reactions, but before I do, just one simple question, Toni. is the European Space Agency in active dialogue with, like the Intergovernmental Panel, the COP26 discussions about the capacity and capability of space data to really help what's happening in relation to progress on Paris? Just a yes or no. Are you involved?
Yes, we are involved, and we will be at COP26, yes. And much of our effort is talking about what space can do, like I'm doing here now. We are paying a lot of attention to that, because
Great.
we are part of the solution.
Indeed.
And taking the pulse of the Earth.
Indeed. Toni, the other question for me very simply is that, are you actually modelling what could possibly happen, but either at a municipal level or a country level, to really think about how all of this data could help shape decision making? Do you have examples of that currently happening, or are you planning to do that?
We are working a lot on first of all, our satellites are getting more and more precise, and we are able to measure sea level rises very locally. That's one answer to the question. Another answer is, yes, we are looking at things like smart cities and what space can do for smart cities. So yeah, we're looking into this very much.
Okay, let's come back to you in a minute. I want to get some quick fire reactions. We have one of our European young leaders, Malcolm Byrne. You responded to my issue about peer pressure. Are you there, Malcolm? Or have you disappeared? Malcolm? Calling Malcolm? No, clearly, there he is. Oh, you're in a car. That serves you right for like putting out an issue whilst you're in the car. Okay, I don't think this is going to work, Malcolm. Love you as I do, but you're in a car and we can barely hear you. Thank you, though. We have others here who've made reference to the fact, and I think it's Mattias Frumerie. Are you there? Your video's off.
But I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
There.
Very briefly, I can now. Thank you. Introduce yourself, would you please?
Yes. Hi. So I'm Mattias Frumerie. Greetings from Stockholm. I'm the Swedish head of delegation to UNFCCC. So looking forward to meeting ESA colleagues when we come to Glasgow at COP26. Mm-hmm. And just my question was very briefly then, to what extent, I mean, as you were saying as well, to what extent that ESA and UNFCCC colleagues have been comparing notes on the information required in the transparency framework, and how ESA and the information that ESA could provide, and to what extent they match.
Okay, and then related to that also, we have Eva. You make an interesting point there. Eva, you still there? Eva Baños?
Hi,
no,
yes,
Eva
I am.
Izquierdo. Hi. Please introduce yourself very briefly.
Oops. I work for the European Environmental Bureau, so we are the largest network of environmental national citizens organizations. We have more than 170 members in 35 European countries. And I thought that the presentation from Toni was very interesting. And my comment was, if you could report on the greenhouse gases emissions of the countries, then the burden that they had about reporting could shift into finding solutions.
Okay, thank you again. Very, very good questions. I'm not going to take answers right now, but can I just encourage you, please do raise your hands or put questions on the Zoom chat. We have, this is not, as you know, those of you who are have been to our events, we don't do the classic conference thing. We believe that you are also part of the brain, and it's not, a back and forth, but actually you will have answers to these questions too, and thoughts and views, because that's the point of it in terms of bringing this kind kind of multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder grouping together. Some very good questions. I know that we've got someone who's caught my eye, and before I move on to our other speakers, and I'm running out of time already. Guillem, I've seen you. You're looking very pensive out into the screen. You're one of our European young leaders. You're also famous for, finding planets. Introduce yourself very briefly if you've got, and also you could just say to me, Dharmendra, no, I don't have a thought, but I don't believe that. Guillem.
No, I'm just listening with a lot of interest. So I work on astrophysics and looking at other planets where we actually learn how special Earth is in terms of its parameters, and that it's in this sweet spot because we see a lot of variety of things. And also this remote observation, I see a bit of mismatch, if I may comment, on sometimes what ESA might want to do from the scientific point of view, because missions are typically designed by scientists which are interested in some phenomena, but sometimes policymakers might be interested in other things. Like, for example, certain kinds of contaminants, certain kinds of time resolution, these kind of things. So maybe some dialogue more, for example, at city level, something like this could be, I've seen initiatives already happening, but at this more micro level, ESA could engage ESA, and also there is a new space developing, which is a new infrastructure where now countries and even cities can even have their small space missions. Maybe Toni wants to comment on that. That would be very interesting to hear about.
And Guillem, do you know of cities and countries having their own space missions? Do you have examples?
You mean, can you repeat the question, sorry?
What you just said now, that, cities and countries can have their own space missions.
Well, I know from the budget point of view, I don't know now. I don't have names in my head, precise examples, but I know for even for scientific observations, for 500,000, a city could have a satellite that can monitor given some orbit. We are, for example, in Catalonia, there are some small sats now developing a program with about a dozen missions that will develop in a couple of years, which will create also a capability for the space technology to develop, because this is an issue as well, that it's a bit underdeveloped, for example, compared to the US or China at this point, space technology.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for responding to my challenge, both to bring you in, but also to ask a question. I'm going to move back to our speakers, and because I'm conscious of time, but I also want to make sure we spend the last 20 minutes or so having a conversation about what we might know to think about and shift. Also to kind of help focus our minds about Glasgow and what they're going to do. What are these leaders and experts really going to do to shift the dial on this, or is it going to be more chat? So I want to move to the private sector. I'm delighted to introduce Christian Hoffmann from Geoville, and I want Christian. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello, you're on mute, Christian.
Thank you, Dharmendra, and good morning to everybody.
Good morning. Good to have you with us. Obviously, I'm aware, but share with us, would you, the kind of potential that the private sector can play. We have horror stories already in the sense that, to a certain extent, the private sector, just like in the tech world, with the internet, it was a private sector that leapt forward, and now governments are catching up with regulation and suddenly find themselves in a world that they can't manage. In the same way that we know, satellites are cheap, as we've just from Guillem, the private sector is up there writ large and faster. We know that the world or space might become, Bezos and others in terms of ownership and access rights, etc. So I think it would be really good to hear from you the different perspective about the social good function the private sector can play. So Christian, that would be helpful to have your perspective.
All right. Thank you very much again, Dharmendra. Now, we are working with data that have been shown by Toni, but we are doing it with a belief that the cause of climate change is, of course, global, but the impact is very local. And speaking about impact, what can be and how can be the adaptation to better cope with the changes, as it's affecting us as citizens in the urban heat islands, as it's affecting our farmers when droughts are raging, as it's affecting local communities that are destroyed by forest fires in the Mediterranean, as it's affecting people living close to the sea and suffering from sea level rise. So how can we mitigate the impact? How can we potentially adapt to it on a local, very local level? Now, we have been working as a company in that sector for the last 22 years. We've worked in over 135 countries of the world. I'm saying this because climate change, the first countries to be affected were the poorest countries. And I will just give you one example, one very concrete example on how we employed and combined space technology with local knowledge to improve the life of 9,200 people in a very, very tiny island in the Indian Ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean called Sao Tome. Most of you will not even know that this is a country by itself. And they have had serious problems with sea level rise. And basically all their livelihoods, all their first row of houses has been continuously washed away. We have helped them, of course, by using models, by using satellite data. We have helped them implement some green measures. That was, for instance, the planification of some mangroves. And we have really helped them to reduce the impact of the sea raging into their neighborhoods. And by that, it's a very small example, but it really showed that if we do something on a local level, we can help at that stage some 9,200 people, that they are not losing their houses every second or third year. Of course, these initiatives in the 135 countries that we have been working in, they were mostly financed by the public sector, be it the World Bank, be it the European Union, be it other donor organizations. And we have now really decided to bring this one step forward, to bring it one step further. And we have decided to develop a tool set to understand really, and through the help of models, to really better be able in a position for the future to predict when hazards meet assets and how to cope with such hazards. And our major we're looking here really at companies. We would really help European companies, outside Europe and industries to comply with corporate sustainable responsibility, to meet climate change adaptation strategies as recently published by the European Union, via providing easily accessible, affordable, quantifiable information, and supported by space technology, and notably by the Copernicus program. That is a world-leading program, or the world-leading program, when it comes to environmental data and to helping making life and the impact of climate change on a local level better. That's it from my side for the
Christian, thank you. And you know, your example, it might seem small, but saving up to 10,000 lives is a big deal. It's a huge deal. And imagine if you were to replicate that in some of the most vulnerable spots in the world, the impact that would have, but also going back to that point of what that might do to people's perspective and perception and the peer pressure and the peer behavior as a result. Timmy, just very simply, so you are a data processor extraordinaire. You kind of interpret the information and make it more accessible. Give us your sense of how you're connected to the kind of process of Paris, the Paris Agreement, and countries pulling together their plans and being able to demonstrate the action. Is your company or the other companies that you're aware of engaged in that process?
Yes, we are very much engaged in that. And for instance, there was an earlier question on how monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions could be done from space. So we have done this, the entire component, and what is called LULUCF, it's land use change and forestry. We have set up such a system for the Republic of Turkey and established it there, and they are using this now to report on their emissions. So it is a very, we are very much engaged in that. We very much know what's happening there. And this is a big role where space technology can play an important factor. Just one more example I may give, Liberia. We have done a similar system and implemented a similar system for Liberia. If they would have done this with the traditional measures of forest inventory, it would have taken them in the African rainforest. It would have taken decades to complete the traditional survey. So this is also something where not all can be done by space technology yet, but a lot of things can be done, and it can really complement and help the terrestrial works, which are very time-consuming and sometimes very dangerous.
Christian, thank you very much. Not a question for you to answer now, but perhaps you might want to respond to on the Zoom chat. Very interesting question by Professor Doug Crawford-Brown from Cambridge, that, you know, as we become more, let's say, granular in information and spatial data, how do you deal with privacy? So obviously you're accessing a ton of data, but who's watching you to make sure you're not doing the wrong thing? Which not necessarily you are, but we know from history that that happens to be the case. But it might be useful to have your thoughts on the Zoom chat. I want to move to Veronika from UNEPS, someone who was part of the early days of this conversation that led to this discussion and was inspiration for it, actually, especially for myself, in this, that let's put this on, let's have this conversation when we are ripe and ready, which we are now. Veronika, this is an approach at UNEPS you've been doing to a certain extent. Just share with us a little bit about your experience, and I think, you know, in the short time that you have, what are the lessons you've learned, or what are the things that we should be looking out for, Veronika? And a warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, and pleasure to be here with all of you. And I'll follow up on the brilliant introduction by Koko. And I'll start reminding that climate change is actually one of the three planetary crises that we face today. And we have to address all of them together. So climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and we talk about different types of pollution, air, water pollution, and of course land degradation. We have to look at them together and look at the data in an interconnected way. That's how we will actually maximize the benefits and minimize trade-offs. We do have tools, and it's very nice to hear that we were inspiration for the forthcoming discussions. I would say the example of the UNEP's World Environment Situation Room, and I mean, I say UNEP, but there are lots of partners involved, and I'm happy to say here that the European Space Agency is one of the partners, and Copernicus program, but many other partners from academic world, but also business sector and other partners. Through the Situation Room, we can catalyze such efforts by providing scientific information. And it is, in our view, transformational change tool, integrating geospatial data, assessments, foresights, and also citizen science. And the citizen science I would really like to highlight here. It also helps to track the progress on the environment-related sustainable development goals and multilateral environmental agreements. Through the Situation Room, you can look at the various data in different regions, countries. You can have a look what country was exposed to floods in 2002, for example, and so on. Air pollution, how air pollution evolves, what are the hotspots. So there are different categories that you can look into in different climate and environmental topics. This platform illustrates the cutting-edge use of big data technologies and geospatial information to predict and track and inform about the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation. But it also underpins solutions and actions. And here, that's again a strong reminder that science can only catalyze climate action and environmental issues when sustained by environmental governance and enabling policies. So linking science to policy and decision-making on different levels, whether it's local level, regional, national, international, remains stronger than ever. And science most definitely must lie at the heart of all decision-making. Yeah, I mentioned the World Environment Situation Room, but of course there are many other tools. I would also mention the International Methane Emissions Observatory. Today we talk mainly about climate, but in the climate action today, we largely focus on addressing CO2 emissions as it is the largest source of global warming. But methane emissions are also very serious. And they are rapidly increasing the pace of climate change. So this new observatory, which has been launched just a few months ago by the European Commission and UNEP, is looking at the different data, analyzing and providing comprehensive understanding of where and how much methane is being emitted, and connect the data to effective mitigation actions. And on a European level, we heard it earlier that there are lots of different initiatives. The Commission's Knowledge Center on Earth Observation, Destination Earth, digital twin of the planet, of course, the Copernicus services. And in the climate law, very recently establishing the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change, that is bringing the scientists in to see how the progress is evolving and how the policies should change or evolve. But so coming to the end, or addressing the challenges, opportunities, what went wrong or what can be done. Once we have the global data on health of the planet, we need to channel this data to digital economy, so that we can influence consumer behavior, supply chains, finance, and public procurement. And ideally, then the environmental data and values should be hard-coded into the apps, platforms, algorithms of the digital economy. Dharmendra, that's something that you mentioned, that we need to involve people. And here I would just say one number, that we really have to remind ourselves as individuals that almost 2/3 of global emissions are linked to households, and mobility, residential, and food sectors. They contribute about 20% of lifestyle emissions. So our impact as individuals is actually huge, and what we can do as individuals is also huge. So I will stop there, but it's certainly we need to translate the data. How does that make sense to all of us, to different stakeholders, and us as citizens?
Veronika, thank you. And thank you for bringing home to us that data set about, the issue of emissions, and then, I suppose localizing it to the personal level, which is really important, because we sometimes always think it's over there, it's not me, or it's not my street or my neighborhood. And it's really helpful. But what you point to, others would call evidence-based policymaking, which has been banging around municipalities and governments for decades, and we're still not doing it because politics gets in the way. So that's why it gives me a lovely segue into introducing Ida. Ida, welcome, and thank you for joining us. No pressure, because it all comes together with you and your brand of politics, Ida. I'm really interested, because we know the thing about this is it's almost as if we know there's a crisis. We have the data, we know what we should be doing, but goodness sake, we just can't get political behaviour to shift and do the right thing. Tell us from your perspective. You've been a minister for the environment in Denmark for 4 years. You're a member of the Danish Parliament. What data do you need? What's the type of data you need to shift not only the behaviour of others, because I know you're on the good side, Ida, but you're also part of a party. And the thing is that parties matter in relation to individual actions, as you know, which is the shame of this. But what data do you need, or what data do politicians need to shift their behaviour and become more data-driven, but also become more impatient with action? Over to you, Ida.
Thank you. And maybe let me start where Koko also started, in the more philosophical mode, because I think what we need to realize is that enlightenment was wrong. You know, it's not that when we get enough information as human beings, we will act rationally. Clearly, we have a lot of information. People do know that we're in a really bad situation. People are pretty convinced, I think, in most countries that climate change is real and that they need to act. The problem is they have no clue what to do, first of all. Secondly, they feel that they are so small that do my actions matter in any way? And the problem is probably coming from modernity and the way the planet has thinking has changed the last 100 years. We've lost the whole idea of community. We've lost the perspective of actions that we make in common, that we make together. The self is over-determined. You put too much pressure on each individual. So how do we bridge this understanding that, in a way, to put it simply, it's not enough to have data. We need to act. That's one thing. We need to get people moved and wanting to act. That's one bridge we have to make. The other one is also going back to Koko. You mentioned Bertrand Russell, and I think he's interesting because he was speaking also at the time of the Cold War. And I think in many ways for young people, you can compare living in the time of the Cold War with living right now under climate change, where you feel your future is disappearing in front of your eyes. Bertrand Russell, he wanted a global government to solve the Cold War, which I think is completely wrong. This is not how people are. I have to go back to all politics is local. No matter what we say, intellectually, we might need a global government. We will not get it because all politics is local. So what we need is what I would call a macroscope. The microscope is invented to see small things, the telescope to see things far away. The macroscope is not invented yet, but it should be an instrument that helps us see the big picture and see our role in the big picture, see that small actions matter in the big picture. This is the macroscope, and this is what data could really think of itself as, a macroscope that helps people see their own role in things, to help them see the big picture, see how their small actions play into the bigger scheme of things. I find to get people to act, you have to make things social. It has to happen in your community. I think one of you also pointed that out, that you have to see it happen close to you and you have to see other people do the same thing. That was Koko too, I think. You have to have supportive schemes where it make it easy for people to do the right things. You have to make it very simple. And you have to make it a signal. You have to see that change is happening. Mm-hmm. And in the end, you need stories also where people can believe and have hope. In order to do all of these things, you need to bring that data that you have much closer to people. You have to make it much more local and relevant. So I think the problem is often also working in international concepts, that we can all see on the big scene what should be done. But when it comes down to what should each country, each region, each person do, it's not clear. So I think that is really the main focus for the macroscope. This is what all the data, the space data that we are getting, it should help us see our small actions in the big picture. Transforming that kind of space data, I have a few examples on how you can make this relevant to people. So one is that we took a lot of weather data in Denmark already, I think 5 or maybe 10 years ago. It was in my time as minister. We used all the weather data in different ways. So I'm going to give you 2 examples that turns this global data into local data. One is what I would call technocratic, which makes people's lives better, but they don't notice it. The other one is, I would say, democratic, so that people could actually see and participate in using that data for making solutions. So the technocratic one is actually that we use weather data in Denmark for controlling our sewage systems. So if we know that the rain is going to fall in the northern part of the city of Copenhagen, we can actually direct the water away to the southern part of the sewage system so that it's clear and empty for a big rainfall. This means we do not have to big sewers, and they're expensive. All of you know this infrastructure to handle the new climate is very expensive. So we can actually use the existing infrastructure as storage because we get the weather data and the warnings, and we can then be prepared for rainfalls and use that. That's very technocratic. It's happening under the ground. People don't notice it. The only thing they see is that their bills for handling wastewater does not go up, and that will make them happy too. The other one, which is more democratic, is that we actually we made a height model in Denmark where we had measured all heights in the country, and we know exactly how floodings will happen when the water comes. We've modeled it. We have the scenarios, and we have then also made these blue spot maps where you can see which parts of the country are really exposed to climate change, to floodings, to groundwaters rising, and to big storms. And when we gave that out free, it put a big pressure on the municipalities and the local governments, because suddenly people who thought, oh, my house is placed right in a blue spot, I need to get my local government to act to be ready for climate change. So these are just two examples of turning this global data and this very aggregated data very local. And that's a macroscope for me.
And that's great, but from witnessing the kind of impact it had on people and communities, can you share that with us? On the more democratic one?
Yeah, well, one was that, that people really started to looking into how climate change was affecting their own homes and lives, because they could see where the water would come in case of flooding. So that meant if you wanted to buy a house, it can impact the house prices in an area if it's actually very exposed to this. It also made parts of society act to be part of climate adaptation in Denmark. So we had suddenly the people working with the sewers, or people working with fixing people's homes and houses. They would come and give a climate check to people's home and say, we can check your home. Are you exposed to these floodings? And we will offer you to fix it for you. And then the insurance company said, okay, if you fix your own home, we will lower your premium. So we suddenly had everybody working on climate adaptation, instead of this just being something happening underground where nobody wants to invest in those stupid sewers. So that's one thing. Another point I want to make here is that I'm very impressed with the Copernicus program and with the data that you get. But I also want to point out that 2 days ago, there was launched a big program called, or a big satellite, I have to find the right name for it, a stratospheric platform called Sky. And what they can do, where Sentinel is measuring 7 times 7 kilometers, this one can go, because it's stationary over 20 kilometers in a big area, it can give you data down to 1 times 1 meter, which is real-time data. This is where you can really see methane emissions happening. So if people can see very, very locally who's emitting what, I'm sure this will also put a very big political pressure on the emitters, if we can get that kind of data where you really can see where's the methane coming from or where's the CO2 coming from. So I think we have to get even closer to Earth, and there's new technology helping us here too.
Ida, thank you very much. I've run out of time, but if I can crave your indulgence, people, those of you who can stay on for another 5 or so minutes, it would be lovely if you can, but I respect the fact that you may need to go. But if we can. Ida, tell me, in terms of the what's happening in Glasgow and your nationally determined contribution, what's your sense of it? Have you been involved? And are you kind of putting some of this wherewithal, this kind of approach, as a part of what you're thinking into the COP discussions in Glasgow?
So definitely, we turned our whole space program. We turned it around last year and said it's going to be completely focused on the green transition. We're going to use it for agriculture, precision agriculture, helping the farmers to use much less fertilizer. And we use it for transport planning so that we can get smarter routes. We use it for planning for wind turbines, where are they optimal positioning. And this whole data approach is going to be, of course, an important part of our getting to a very ambitious goal of 70% CO2 reductions that we are going to Glasgow with. So I think this is going to be a part of what the Danish government presents, and it's going to make it both cheaper and easier and with public support. Our biggest challenge right now, just to very briefly, is to have a CO2 taxation locally or nationally in Denmark. We really need to have a price on CO2, and we're going to do it in Denmark. The problem is we need data for, especially from the agricultural sector, because it makes it very hard to make a CO2 tax if you don't have the real fair data for each farmer, for instance. How much do they emit? So this is a place where we could really need help too.
Ida, thank you very much. It's really, and again, I'm really grateful for those of you who are commenting on the Zoom chat, especially yourself. You know, Eva, you've made some excellent comments there. We look forward, Eva Baños, to you know the report you refer to. We also have Judith from Catalonia. Again, really important point. I was going to bring in yourself, Richard, from Equinor, because I think there's something about how big companies are behaving around this, but I think you've disappeared because of time. But Richard, you're still there. Can I pull you in and just challenge you a little bit? You're on mute. Can you hear me? Unfortunately not. Okay. Don't worry, time is out. But if I may, I think again, I said thank you all for your commentary on this. I want to, I suppose, conclude on the fact that we all know data is everything, and its quality, how it's collected, and the AI that's used for creating data sets is also something to consider. But on the one hand, you've got the ability to observe. But as Ida, you say, I mean, and all of you said, we've had data for a long time, and we've had science with us for a long time, but actually what matters is if decision-making is going to change, if resource allocation, investment, innovation, etc. and so forth is actually going to change and target itself on what is a real-time emergency. I suppose, in conclusion, I want to go back to Toni and Koko. And one of the things that I'm not sure what you guys think, we have Glasgow coming up, right? And it will be this big fanfare and everyone kind of potentially chest beating or saying, oh, great, we have wonderful plans. How do we shift the dial in that conversation that space data can actually be something which is so much more fundamental in assisting not only the transparency, the accountability, but the speed of progress on what we do to tackle climate change. So, Toni, I want to come back to you briefly in terms of just some summative points from what you've heard, but how do we change the dialogue with what you sit on in Glasgow that's coming up this year? I know that's a tough question, Toni.
Yeah. Thank you. So what we intend to do in Glasgow is to have a stand, and we have something we call the feed experience, which is actually computer tools and screens for visualizing our Earth observation data and also the information that we derive from this. And we will put that on a stand in Glasgow for people to see. And let's say democratizing or making visible to everybody, citizens, what we have of data and what they can be used for.
Okay, Toni, so I know, we're partners in this, but I feel having a stand isn't good enough. We actually need to be on the platform. And so on that point, I want to go to Koko. Koko, how can we change this dialogue? We don't need a stand to tell us what data is available. You know what data is available. You've heard today. I think this conversation has alerted us to the fact that we're missing a trick, aren't we, in the discussions around Paris, the national determined targets, the issue of enhanced, transparency and being able to understand what's going on in locality. We've heard from Ida that actually you could really go down even further, but it's how you use the information to create citizen advocacy, citizen engagement, but ultimately, really fire the imagination of people. They can do something, but also going back to your point about peer pressure, because they'll know that actually on my street, this is what's happening as opposed to another neighborhood. And therefore you give rise to civic and civil engagement in terms of political behavior. I know it's a tough question, but tell us, what do we need to do to make sure that the space data isn't a stand at Glasgow, but actually a conversation, a recommendation that you actually could drive behavior differently if we made better use of space data? And I know that's challenging, Koko.
I mean, you said it so well, and also such a privilege. All of the speakers, I've been taking notes, really given me a lot to think about. I'm going to build on a couple of things you just said, Dharmendra, and also Toni. It's the conversation. And so having a pavilion at Glasgow is one opportunity for people to see with their eyes. Seeing is believing. And again, kind of going back to what many people said, but Ida, I'll pick on you. You're so that macro scope that people see, oh my gosh, that's where I live. That's my country. That's my region. That's my town. This visualization plays such a big role in changing our hearts and changing our minds. So that's just one thing. Everybody go visit this, make sure and distribute it and foster that conversation at your home with your family and your friends. That's really important. People need to change their beliefs, change their perceptions of what's going on, and then comes the action. What we've seen over the past just 2 or 3 years, the youth on the streets, the grandparents on the streets, people talking about what they're experiencing is changing that belief and perception. So that has had a big influence. I can't say directly, but you've seen major administrations. The Chinese Prime Minister Ping announced at the General Assembly last year big Chinese commitments. Now, of course, you always need to see the action. The European Union is building a greener recovery. Let's hope that those commitments actually materialize. That citizen advocacy plays a huge role in accountability. The US, my country, is pointing the direction towards a green future. And I can't help but think it has to do with people seeing. It's the visual information. It plays such an important role. We need more of that. When citizens signal to their leaders, this is what we want, this is acceptable, I think that goes a long way in making it possible for decision makers to be bold. At the end, circling back to what you mentioned at the beginning, Dharmendra, different political systems are all a little bit different, but ultimately, let's hope that our leaders feel that they're accountable to their citizens, and for citizens to really articulate and say, we want that future, we want that direction, go that direction. I think that plays a very important role also in the speed of change. Change is hard, and now we really need to speed up.
Koko, thank you very much for that. And my comment, and Toni, you I hope you understand this, wasn't to be critical of you. It's more about the criticism of how people are making use of space data and the fact that politicians should be making more and better use of it. And I hope, I get your point, Koko, but the fact is, we know human nature, and adversity seems to drive action rather than prevention. And that's the issue here, that as we know, this year alone, most of us are witnessing 4 seasons in a day. And we think, that's just bad weather. And we're not really getting a grip about what is actually happening to our environment. And, I think the issue is that those of our communities who are on the vulnerable edges, whether it's the island communities or the poorest, or those in the poorest built social housing in inner cities, are going to suffer the brunt of this if we don't take action now. And I hope that, at COP, at 26, in Glasgow, that we can move the notion of a pavilion that's good to look at, and I'm with you, but let's make that into a policy pathway for better action and accountability and ultimately transparency on this agenda. And we look forward to working with you, and we'll bring you back, but we'll engage with you and others on seeing what we can do to really make space data a part of the solution for action and transparency on climate change. Colleagues, thank you very much. I'm well overdue. I do apologize. I hope you found it useful, in thought-provoking, but also made you think about what could happen and what we can do, and what are some of the solutions that we supercharge if we use the kind of data we have available to us, but making it, as ever, locality matters in these discussions. Thank you all very much. Keep an eye on our website for our next suite of discussions. We have another conversation under our program on Making Space Matter, which is going to be talking about who regulates space. how do we govern space? So I look forward to welcoming you back to that and other events that we have in the pipeline. Thank you very much. Thanks to all our contributors. Thanks to all of you for a lively Zoom chat too. And see you again soon. Take care. My name is Dharmendra Kanani, Chief Spokesperson, but also Director of our Space, Digital, Peace, Security, Defence and Asia Programmes. So very good to welcome you and see you again very soon. Mind your distance and take care. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
L'enregistrement a été interrompu.